Oh my goodness, you guys are just angels. Why can't I sing like that? I say that every time, don't I? Okay, so I have to give a little bit of a warning. This is so in me. I'm so excited about what I have to share this morning about prosperity and mothering and nurturing, and there's just so much so that my spouse and son went to the movies yesterday, and they dropped me off at Starbucks so I could do my work. I wrote 9 pages, y'all. So buckle in. No, I woke up this morning. I said, "Yeah, 9 pages is too much. So let's hope you don't get the 9 pages, right?" So let me start with just a couple of jokes, which hopefully you'll laugh too. So, those who have raised toddlers understand that going to the bathroom in private is overrated. If you have raised a tween, you understand why some animals eat their young, right? And last but not least, and I'm sorry, Theo, for this one, my teen is mad at me, and it could be because of any of the horrible things I did this morning. I stood in the kitchen, I poured coffee, I stared out the window, and I said good morning. Oh, and I also breathed. Sorry about that, my sweetie. So thank you so much, Reverend Laverne. We actually met earlier this week, and thank you again for that, our time and connection. I always leave so filled and feel so heard. And we talked about, it's raining. Oh my goodness, okay. And we talked about this idea of prosperity and this idea that an aspect of it is nurturing, right? And how much that fits in with this idea of Mother's Day. And I love that the UK doesn't call it Mother's Day, but calls it Mothering Day. Isn't that beautiful? Because that is it. It's a mothering, it's a nurturing. And I believe that that nurturing, it's not just something that mothers do, right? It's something we all do. We all mother one another. We all nurture one another. We all love one another. At least that is what the purpose of relationships are, right? So I'm looking at prosperity this morning and what we said in not just finances. I'm looking at prosperity in terms of where are there stories that we hold lack and limitation, and how do those stories drive our bus, or how have they driven our bus? And as I was thinking about this and reflecting on this, I was thinking about my first entry into Unity. I was in my 20s, and I started going to Unity of Houston. And like many of you who say when you first went to Unity Church, you felt like you came home, right? It's a coming home. It's like, other people believe what I do. God is expansive. God is good. God is love, right? And I believed all of that, and it immediately struck a chord and resonated with me. But there's one thing that Reverend Howard Caesar, he was the minister at the time, would say, and that is, life is meant to be good. Do y'all remember that? That's a tagline of the church even. Life is meant to be good. And it's not that I didn't believe it, it's just that I didn't see it working in my life. I didn't see that life was good or meant to be good. And this came from my family of origin, which that usually does, right? And my father, he had to leave school early. He had to help his family. That's a story of many, right? He fought in World War II. Nothing easy about that. He endured poverty, racism, a lot, right? And he did succeed, and he did make a living for his family, a very good one. And for him, life still felt hard. It was still a struggle. It was still a struggle. And my mom, and my dad also, because of that, he didn't trust life, which, right? Why would you? And then what happens when you don't trust life? It shows up. It's only going to be harder, right? You're going to be in that cycle if it's all going to be a struggle. If you see it as a struggle, it's going to be a struggle. That's the reality. And my mom had friends, so she trusted people. She had a church community, and still for her, life felt hard. So that's where that lack, that limitation belief was, and how there are times it still drives my bus, even now. Life is hard. This work is hard. I don't have enough time, right? All of that belief that we know isn't true. So the title of the sermon is Living in the Field of Treasures. Isn't that beautiful? How does that feel for you? Just living in the field of treasures, right? And so Charles Fillmore, our co-founder, and the book I'm reading and I'm working on in this series is called Prosperity. And just to plug, y'all, in September, we will be teaching a class on prosperity. I'll be teaching out of this one. Reverend Vita will be teaching out of Eric Butterworth's Spiritual Economics, and my sister, who's an LUT, is going to use the Catherine Ponder book. So in September, mark your calendars now, because what you'll be able to do is really use these teachings in your life. But anyway, getting back to what I was saying is that Charles Fillmore says that what Jesus is that he's a master of living in the field of treasures. Isn't that beautiful? He's a master. And what does he mean by that? Well, what we know, right, is that what did Jesus say? The Father and I are one. The Father and I are one. So what does that mean? He's always connected. He's always connected. Always in that conscious connection. And also in that place of knowing that God is this substance, right? God is this all supply. Not only that, God is available and accessible to everyone. Isn't that beautiful? That's something that Reverend Vita likes to say. Equally accessible and available to everyone. Because why? God's a principle. God's a principle. What does that mean? Unchanging. That's what that means. Just like gravity, right? The law of gravity. If you drop something, it's going to fall. And getting back, and then that makes me think about children, right? Young people, when they're in their, what are those things called? They sit in them and you feed them. High chairs. Sorry, y'all. High chairs. Yeah, I know, right? Sorry. When they're sitting in their high chairs, what is one thing they do? They drop something. They drop something. Why do they drop it? To watch it falls, to see if you'll pick it up. And why do they want to see if you'll pick it up? What is that game about? It's a game of trust. That's what that is. It's a game of trust, because every time, what does the mom do? Or the dad, or whomever? You pick it up, and they drop it, and you pick it up, and they drop it, and you pick it up. And we can see that as a representation of our relationship with God, right? Right? We fall, we're picked up. Desmond Tutu, I love what Desmond Tutu once said. He said, God doesn't say to people, goodbye to bad rubbish. What God says is, I'm going to pick you up and I'm going to dust you off and you go on your way. And that's a beautiful way of imagining a God outside of us, right? Is that energy and that substance and that love and that life, and it's within us as well. It's within each of us as well. So let me get back to my 9-page sermon. So to live from this field of treasure is to know that there's already an abundance. There's always abundance. What did Jesus do? There was always enough food, right? There was always enough wine. There was always enough love, not just for one group, for everyone. There was always enough understanding. There was always enough peace. It was always there, already there. And he practiced that in his short life. He didn't practice, wow, this life is hard, did he? And he was being hunted down, and he was going to be crucified. And even then, the words weren't, this life is hard. It was, I am one with you, right? And I submit to your will. And that's what he did. So when we live in that field of treasures, it is knowing there's already enough. It's knowing that life is meant to be good. We're reframing the narrative, right, that I talked about last week. Life is meant to be good, and we're choosing to live it. We're choosing to be it. So I want to share, specifically this morning, I want to look and have a focus on relationships. Because how do we know Jesus but through relationships, right? That's how we know him. because of the life he lived. We know him because of the relationship he had with God and how he changed what a relationship with God looked like and how he reframed what the Hebrews said about God and relationships with God. And we know about him because of the oral tradition. We know about him because he was written. We know about him because he had relationships with people that were so profound and so deep that we're still talking about it now, right? It's still guiding our lives now. So this is all very long-winded way of saying, first, I want to talk about what blocks us from prosperity. And I want to demonstrate how Jesus helps us, and we can see him as reframing narratives. And I'm giving a little bit of a review because we had some absences last week. I don't know if y'all noticed that. Now, here's the thing. They're excused, okay? Because the weather was really bad. So I'm glad you stayed home and you were safe. But I am going to review because you missed a big chunk. So I'm going to talk about that. And then I want to look specifically at the relationship of Martha and Mary. I know, and I'm still struggling with it. But here's the thing about that relationship. Again, it's intentional, loving relationship. And yeah, so I'll get to that. And then last, and we can struggle with that together. I love struggling with text. And then last, I want to look at my own growth opportunities, right? And my relationship with divine and trusting the divine. And my relationship with my growing team that I'm so blessed to have in my life, because there's always opportunities for growth when you're mothering, right? So I always like us to have an affirmation that's going to support everything and support us to live in the field of treasures. And the affirmation that I want to share with you is one that I learned years ago from my beloved, dear, wonderful friend, Reverend Jean Marie, and that is, God is my source. And that's been one of her practices that she shared with me years ago. God is my source, right? God is my source. So just take that in. Let's all be reminded. God is my source. That still small voice whispering, God is my source. So may we know it now. We may know it all week. May we know it always. May we know that we're always being taken into a deeper relationship of that knowing. It's a nurturing. It's a trusting. It's a practice of gratitude. It's a way of being, right? God is my source. Okay, so now we're going to review. Sorry about y'all that y'all were present. This is for those absent people. Y'all know I'm teasing. Okay, so a misunderstanding of prosperity is believing that material goods make us prosperous. Right? That's a misunderstanding. Because what it may happen to those material goods, what may happen to the money, goes. Right? It does. The market does what it does. One day you may have it, next day, gone. Remember what happened to those in the 1930s when the stock market went? How many millionaires just killed themselves? Because that was where they put their trust, right? That's where they're. So that's the misunderstanding of prosperity. And when we see that is just having our prosperity, we're not living our lives from knowing that God is our source, right? So that's one misunderstanding. Another block in our prosperity is believing in lack, believing in limitation, believing in scarcity, right? Believing what the culture even corroborates, the idea of life is a, well, they use that, there's that other word. The other word. And then you die, right? Yeah, you know which word I'm talking about. Life is, and then you die, right? That's when you're believing that, you're only going to show, that's only going to keep showing up for you, that hard, that struggle, right? So that's going to be a block in your prosperity. And so one of the things I said, and I believe is what Jesus did, is he reframed narratives. He completely reframed narratives. He is the one that showed us I am one with God, right? I am one with the substance. I am one with the source. And he did it in the way that he looked at Hebrew teachings. Think about the commandments, right? He turned those commandments around and reframed them. And the idea of the Beatitudes is they are blessings. They are blessings of fortune. They are blessings of, here are the field of treasures that you already live in. That's what so he reframed that. And then in the Sermon on the Mount, think about what he says. You have heard it said, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, right? So he reframed this idea of this vengeful thinking, and he turned it into love. And he says, if somebody asks for your shirt, what do? You give them that, and you give them even more. Because for him, there's abundance. And it's always going to come to me. And when I give, I receive, right? You open your arms. When you give, you receive. When you give love, you receive love, right? You get love. That's just how that works. So, the other one, love your enemies. And this is the one that I said before, is that Gandhi, who was not Christian, he based his whole nonviolence on the idea of loving your enemies. You don't just love those that love you. You even love the difficult ones. That's hard, right? That's a practice. That's a practice. You love them all. You love them all, even the enemies. So that's this idea of reframing narratives. So the one piece that I feel like that was really the one that I want to think about is the relationship with the God, right? It's not a vengeful God outside of you that's judging you and what's the word? Not commending. Thank you so much, Keith. Condemning. That's not the God. It's the big God. And it's being in relationship, in intentional, conscious relationship with that God. And so what Jesus also put at the forefront is relationships and proper relationships. How are we in proper relationship with one another? By loving ourselves and others, right? By seeing the sacredness in each of us, and by knowing that each of us has unique gifts to share. And we're here to hear one another and see one another. That's proper relationship, and that's what Jesus did. And I'm saying this because I'm taking it to Martha and Mary. And if y'all don't know, Martha and Mary, they were the sisters in Bethany. They were the ones that were the sister to Lazarus, remember? And he was really good friends with them. And they were well off, fairly well off. Remember, it's Mary that uses the oil on Jesus' feet and then wipes them with her hair. To have that kind of oil, you're going to be fairly well off. And remember, women are the ones that kept the disciples going, that fed them, that nourished. Exactly, thank you, right? They're important. We need them, absolutely. So I go to this story because I think what Jesus is doing in this story, so often we look at this story and we see, have you noticed we read it as if Mary's a hero and Martha's a villain? Have you noticed that? And I don't believe that's what Jesus was saying at all. And so I want to read this to y'all. And I've been working with it, and I want to still work with it. And it's in here, I promise. I'll find it, y'all. Oh, there it is. Okay. As Jesus and his disciples were on their way, he came to a village where a woman named Martha opened her home to him. She had a sister called Mary who sat at the Lord's feet listening to what he said. Listen to that. Sat at the Lord's feet. That's crucial. But Martha was distracted by all the preparations that had to be made. She came to him and asked, Lord, don't you care that my sister has left me to do the work by myself? Tell her to help me. Martha, Martha, the Lord answered, you are worried and upset about many things, but few things are needed, or indeed only one. Mary has chosen what is better, and it will not be taken away from her. So in here, very often people say, oh man, Martha's a villain. What does she know? Right? And Mary's the good one that knows what to do. And what I like to think is happening in this story is he's turning her Godward. right? It's that piece of noticing. I notice that you're worried here, right? I notice you're worrying. But here's the thing. There's sufficiency in knowing the one. And when you know the one, everything else falls into place. How does that feel for y'all? Doesn't that feel like better knowing that? And the piece about Mary, this is another way that he expands definitions, right? And reframes narrative. That she's a woman sitting at his feet. She's a disciple, right? She's a disciple. And I love that about Jesus because it wasn't just the men that were disciples. The teachings were for everyone. Isn't that beautiful? So when we look at Martha, we don't look at her as this villain, but we look at her as when we are in our human experience, right? There are times we're worried. There are times we're anxious. And what do those around us do? Bring us back to center, back to center. So I want to share a personal story about that, and those of you who are in Sacred Circle know where I'm going with this. And that is the prosperity that shows up in our relationships and the ways that we nurture, we mother one another. This past Sacred Circle, after we finish a book, we take time to just eat good food and chat with one another. And Diane, I have to have that recipe for your bruschetta. She makes the best bruschetta. I even had it for breakfast the next day. That's how delicious her bruschetta is. I'm not kidding. I know, right? I know. So there we are having a wonderful time and chatting, and we say, you know what, let's do check-ins, because that's our practice. We do check-ins. And it's a vulnerable space. It's a brave space. It's just a beautiful space of nurturing one another. So it was my time, and I didn't want to share. And I had these wonderful people say, it's okay, just share. So Monday, this was Wednesday. On Monday, was my day off, and I was looking at Facebook, which is what you do on day offs, right? And and I ran into this video, and it was so sweet, and it was this woman walking on a beach, and her young son is holding up the camera and videoing her. And he says, and you can hear this voice says, isn't she lovely? She's the best mother. And I hear that, and I'm uncontrollably crying on the couch. And I think at some point Thomas is like, what's going on? Are you okay? Right? Are you okay? And I am reminded of what a wonderful time I've had with my son when he was that age. And what a wonderful time I had being a stay-at-home mom. And I recognized I was grieving that time in our lives. And it's not that I love where he is right now. He's self-individuating, right? He's growing. He's doing exactly what he needs to do. And I need to tend to the grief. So I share that with everyone. And all I had are these open arms and open hearts. And mothers and fathers both telling me, we know, we've been there. We get it. And that just felt so nurturing. And that is what I love about this place, right? Because that's what we do for one another. That's what we do. It's like when Jesus notices Martha and her worrying or whatever she is doing, y'all noticed my grief and said, yes, we know. And here's what we also know, right? Here's what we also know. So anyway, that story continued to be alive in me. And then what I recognized as I sat with it through the week is what was underneath that grief, but my fear. That's what was underneath about the grief. Is fear, because we are steady. We are the foundation of nourishing the young people in our lives, right? And we are steady so that they can do their growing and step away, right? And we are the steady ones. And we're so lucky that they do that. And so what I recognize, what came into me is, oh, I can't protect him from danger, right? Lack and limitation. I can't protect him from danger. And so that took me into deeper relationship with my source. Because I trust my source. I trust God with myself. So of course with my son, right? So on Mothering Day, let us think about the ways that we nourish and we nurture, and I'm so grateful for the ways that y'all make space for me, for all of us, into that nurturing. So how do we live in the field of treasures? We nurture ourselves and our relationships with the all-sufficiency and all goodness that God is our source. We trust that God as principle is changeless and always available. And last, we're grateful, right? We're grateful. So one more part, and then I'll let y'all go have cake. Okay. One more part, y'all. So y'all remember a couple of weeks ago I talked about awe, right? And I talked about awe being that practice that transforms. So, and I gave you this list of things that would possibly have you feeling awe, this list. And what I realized, because I've been practicing that list, is like, that's a practice of nurturing. That's a way to nourish ourselves. That's a way to trust that we live in an abundant life, and abundant lives, filled with possibility. So if this feels comfortable, close your eyes and let your minds wander, and let this be a time of letting these images nourish you and nurture you. Remember a time of light, candles wrapped in a holy glow, a fireworks display, the bright morning sun, sun rays on water, moonbeams seeping through your window. Remember a time of joy, rising giggles, infectious laughs, private jokes that when you think of them, you immediately hold your side and explode into laughter. Recall an event that brought tears of elation to your glistening eyes. Remember a time of touch, the rough or smooth feel of a stone, the tickle of grass on bare feet, the sensation of sand in between your toes, the hand that fits yours best, the warm, the long hugs, the memory of being held. Remember a time of wonder. Think of moments you never thought would happen, the miracle of forgiveness, the prayers that come true, the dreams that become reality, gratitude for what has been and what has yet to be. Daydream, imagine, and remember that you are on the other side of things hoped for. Remember a time of weightlessness. Imagine the feel of water as it carries you. Call to mind the feel of the blustery wind. Imagine seeing 100 colorful hot balloons rising until all you see are spots of color in the sky. And until your mind is tether-free. So know this morning, my beloveds, that I love you, I encourage you, I support you, and I'm so grateful for y'all. Amen.